All right, good morning, students. Welcome to the Chapter 7, Chapter 8 lectures. I plan on doing these in two separate lectures, so you're not sitting and having to go through two full chapters at one time. Uh, we're going to start with 7, of course, because that would be the proper order they come in. That would make sense. I will go through 7, and that'll be the first video. Then the next one that I'll post will be Chapter 8. So Chapter 7 deals with intentional torts. This week and in this section, we're dealing with our civil side of our court system. We talked last week about criminal law. This one is civil law. One of the parts of that is intentional torts or intentional harms. Tort is what brings us into the courtroom when it comes to civil suits. All right. We're going to look at intent, a harm to a person, a harm to the right of dignity, then how it affects property and economic interest, and then we'll talk about some of the defenses to intentional torts as we wind up Chapter 7. To start off with, all forms of civil liability are either voluntarily assumed, as by contract, or involuntary assumed, as opposed by law. Tort liability is the second type. It is violating some type of liability that is imposed by law upon an individual or a company, corporation, to other individuals, companies, or corporations. The law stipulates how we're supposed to act toward others. And this is where we'll see that when the law is violated, people can be brought into suit for such things. The three principal objectives in the law of tort are to compensate persons who sustain harm or loss resulting from that conduct, or for another's conduct, or this could be a company or corporation, and to place the cost of that compensation only on those parties who should bear it. That is when we're finding that liability, whoever is confirmed to be liable by the courts once it goes through the court process, and a jury or a judge, depending on how the trial is set up, finds that a party is liable, then they will be the only ones to bear the compensation, not coming from other areas. And also the prevention of harms and losses for the future. Sometimes that is done by awarding those punitive damages that we'll have discussed, and maybe we'll discuss a little further here. When a tort is considered to be committed, if you'll think back last week to a criminal law, we needed those two specific pieces. We needed an intent and we needed an act. We have something similar to that with intentional torts. First, we have a duty owed by one person to another. When that duty is breached and they are the proximate cause of it, the party is proximate cause, and the injury or damage to the owner of legally protected interest. Now, legally protected interest, as we'll see, is anything that you have a legal right to. Right? Intent does not require a hostile or evil motive. Rather, it talks about you have a desire to cause the consequences, or you believe that those consequences would result if you do an action. Knowing what the results are of an action is very important when we consider what goes on with torts, as opposed to criminal law, where the intent is to cause that specific harm to a person. In tort law, and how intent is described in tort law, is knowing that the consequences of the action would substantially have a substantial certainty to an end result that could cause the harm to another person. You're doing something that you know could cause harm to someone. You're showing intent in that action. Another way to look at it, and this kind of just a little chart to break it down, does the defendant desire to cause a consequence? If yes, then we definitely have intent. If no, do they believe the consequences are substantially going to happen? Once again, that yes, we have intent. If the person doesn't fully understand those consequences are going to happen, then we get into lack of intent. So harm to a person, different things that we can see as harm to a person. We have battery and assault here. A lot of times we hear those the other way around. We hear assault and battery put together. Assault is the infliction of an apprehension of some type of immediate harm going to happen to a person, some type of offensive contact. Uh, you can consider this as if someone is standing over another person with their fist clenched, looking down at them like they are fixing to strike them. The person who is the harmed party here is the one who is in fear of being hit because a person is standing over them, fist clenched in an aggressive manner. When they're doing that, they're putting that person in fear of immediate bodily harm. In other words, they're going to get hit. There's something is going to happen to them that's going to cause them harm. Battery is when that assault has been acted out. All right. So the assault is that standing over someone with a fist clench, that intense look, that, bringing them the thought of immediate harm coming to them. Battery is when that harm actually comes. So that offensive contact, that bodily harm has happened. Then we have battery at that point. So assault is the apprehension of the harm. Battery is the actual harm happening to the person. False imprisonment, pretty much the name itself gives you the definition, but confining someone when there's not a reason to confine them against their will. Emotional distress is some type of extreme or outrageous conduct that you intentionally or recklessly causing severe emotional distress. There's a lot of ways that emotional distress can be looked at as how it applies to this. It could be something as outrageous as when there have been cases where when someone was in some type of incarceration and loud music was being played to cause them an additional amount of distress above what they already felt, causing some type of severe emotional distress. Or it could be that you have a neighbor who is a veteran of the armed forces. Maybe they did combat, and you intentionally set off fireworks and firecrackers or fire weapons when you know they're outside, or they can at least in a position where they could hear what is going on, and you know for a fact that it causes them emotional distress, and you continue to do it. That is the infliction of emotional distress with intent. All right, you're intending to cause them some type of emotional distress for whatever reason it could be. Another way of looking at this is causing someone to have a constant, feeling of foreboding because, whether it could be something as simple as, not as stalking as simple, but stalking or sending messages to someone, interfering with how they would happily live their life, causing them distress in a way that emotionally disturbs them or causes them that emotional distress also. We have a right to dignity guaranteed us by the Constitution. That is one of our constitutional rights. It may not so much say the word dignity, but those rights that we see when it comes to freedom of speech or religion or those type of things, freedom to be secure in our homes, that is our freedom to a right of dignity. Defamation is when we begin to infringe upon those rights by one party upon another party. There's two different ways that defamation can be seen. They both have to be considered a false communication that injures a person's reputation. Libel is when it's written or electronically transmitted, whether that is through a written note, a newspaper article, a post on social media, a review that is not when it comes, we'll look at businesses in a minute, but also when you're reviewing a person's interactions with others, if you defame them in some way. Now, keep in mind, false communication is what we have to look at here. So, slander is when we speak it out loud. Libel is when it's written or transmitted in some form. They both require it to be a false communication. When we get into defenses, you'll see why that false communication part is so important. Simply proving that it's true in most cases is a defense to the suits of libel and slander, the tort of libel or slander. Defamation, there's a defense to that is the truth, absolute privilege, conditional privilege or constitutional privilege, or defenses to the defamation action. Those privileges, if we think about, we just in the fall went through an election cycle. During election cycles, there are always attempts to defame the person you are running against, whoever your adversary in the election is. You are trying to defame them. There's privilege involved in that, where those things can be said, and there's nothing to say that just because it's false that there can be an action there. Now, there are certain laws that are in place, especially with the increasing use of AI in a lot of what goes on with elections. And by the time we get to the next cycle, which will be, it'll kick off at some point this year. And then next year is when we'll be having those midterm elections. Here in Florida, we'll be electing a new governor at that point, because Governor DeSantis will serve 2 terms. We'll have several other offices up for election. When we have those, 30 years ago, it was about what was being said, commercials, that type of thing. Now we have cases where we have AI being used to alter images, or there was cases in during the election, the early stages of the presidential election, where AI was being used. The voice version of AI was being used to make phone calls to citizens in a couple of the New England states that were some of the early election areas, using the voice of former President Biden. And they did that by having a recording, of course, of his, and then using AI to mimic it. And the calls were going out saying that it was Joe Biden, that, he was, this was his stance on certain things. And it was proven that it was never sent by the campaign, that an outside source had done that. If the outside source had been found to, what they were doing, they would not have been covered by privilege, because they were using a definite ruse to try to change a vote. When that is being done, truth doesn't come into play, because they're using a alternative means from the truth, and privilege does not cover that. There are cases going on in a couple of states in the Midwest where AI altered images have been used for election purposes and for advertisement purposes. These are in a couple of special elections that are going on to fill spots from folks who have either just stepped down from their positions or have been appointed to cabinet positions, whatever it may be. And in one of those, it took an old photo of one of the candidates and superimposed it with a newer photo and changed the facial expression. Doesn't seem like a lot, but that simple change of the facial expression changed the whole manner in which that photo was used in the first place. And the state that it happened in had recently enacted a law that said that if you use AI in any way to change this person's, or in an election process specifically, if you use AI in any way to change or alter photos or words that have been said, you have to state it and let it be known that artificial intelligence was used for this. So there are certain laws that are making sure that the constitutional privilege or conditional privilege that exists around uh, elections and advertisements and things on those lines are not being taken advantage of simply because they're being used in that to where an egregious act such as using AI to completely change what a person says or to uh, in the case of like it was with former President Biden to use their voice, their likeness to state something that was categorically not in line with how they would normally stand. Those type of things are not considered privilege and they do not fit into those protections. So the privilege protection is changing as, of course, society changes. And as laws come into place to deal with AI and to deal with other things along those lines, and that is part of uh, what we have to look at and what the courts are having to look at. And the legislators in the states and eventually the federal government will look at to make sure that we're not, you know, causing a harm by not acting upon it. Invasion of privacy. There are different ways that can happen. Appropriation is the unauthorized use of a person's identity. Once again, we could fall back to the use of the former president's voice or a simulation of his voice in phone calls to be an appropriation issue. We have intrusion, which is an unreasonable or highly offensive interference with the seclusion of another. Uh, we're allowed to be alone and enjoy that aloneness, that quiet that we sometimes will select. And someone who intrudes upon that in an unreasonable way and it's highly offensive, we can bring a suit against them. And in the public disclosure of private facts, unfortunately, we see this so much with how social media is used. It has become I hate to use the word pandemic, but it has become such that you know it's almost becoming accepted that these things happen. And really and truly, when it's a highly offensive publicity of private information, we need to look at that. Place where this is really being chased down and they're using it will bring a couple of these together. Uh, the crackdown of illicit photos or illicit videos using someone's image superimposed over it with the use of AI once again uh, has become more and more prevalent. So now they're cracking down on that. It's an invasion of privacy. It's also, it can be appropriation using their image. If it is photos that were not meant to be out there, uh, that is private information, and the publicity of that would be an issue. Putting someone in a false light, uh, that is highly offensive or false publicity about another. Then the defenses that are absolute, conditional, and constitutional privilege. Once again, there's privilege, which goes back to advertisements and goes back to certain things that can allow that to happen. Misuse of legal procedure towards to protect an individual from unjustifiable litigation. You see a lot of these types of cases where normally the litigation being sought out will be dropped and a lawsuit can happen because the party who was being sued, decides, okay, I want to put a stop to this, and they're going to bring the suit against those who are unjustifiably litigating them. Skip over this one. I'll let you go back. You can go back and look at it. It is should be part of the PowerPoint, or will be if it's not on in Canvas. Definition to intentional harm to property includes trespass to real property, nuisance, trespass to personal property, and the conversion of such personal property. All right. So let's talk about what real property is first. It's land or anything attached to it. This is the old Under Old English common law, the chattel, when you study property law, the chattel rights are what goes into a lot of how we look at our real property and the rights that go with real property. A lot of our civil law and tort law, or specifically things on these lines, come from that Old English common law without much change. There hasn't been a lot of change to it. Trespass is definitely one of those, wrongfully entering on land of another. Nuisance is not trespassing but interfering with another's use and enjoyment of their land. Uh, having, if we think about neighbors and the how neighbors, especially when you move further and further away from rural areas into more urban areas, homes become closer together. Uh, for some of you, you may live in some of the student housing or the apartments that are all over Gainesville. Uh, your neighbors are sometimes in the same apartment as you, just in a different room. They have a room they rent, and you have one you rent, or it could be the neighbors in the next apartment over. Nuisance in a situation like that would be playing of loud music that keeps the person next to you from enjoying what is rightfully theirs. Now, let's go back a little bit. I'm going to go through these pretty fast here. But it talked about here a legally protected interest. So this is a good one to really kind of pin in on the legally protected interest. Is when we think about what nuisance is. A person has a legally protected interest. A party has that legally protected interest to enjoy their home, the land that they either rent or own, that their home sits on, because that is a legally obtained right by the payment that they make for it. They have a right to enjoy it. And as long as they're doing so legally. The interference with that enjoyment is what is considered nuisance. So a neighbor who plays music at an exceptionally loud volume to where someone cannot enjoy their outside, spending time in their yard, whether it's working in their yard or just, setting out with friends in their yard, because the music next door is coming so loud that it interferes with that enjoyment, that can be a nuisance. If you've ever heard law enforcement talk about nuisance calls, that is what they're referring to, calls where it's something along those lines. Uh, Someone's calling because there's music being played too loud. Someone is doing something they shouldn't do. It's a way for you to protect your enjoyment and let others know that, okay, you're infringing upon this. For a person to enjoy their property, they don't necessarily have to have their music played at 100 if their volume knob goes to 100. If they do, maybe they should get their hearing checked to see if that's where it needs to be. But when you interfere with someone else's enjoyment, now there are a lot of little small, rules and laws that kind of come into play with real property. Someone who owns the rights to the land, and at times people were buying air rights, which means they have ownership of a view, basically, is what that gets into, a view. And if you put something that obstructs their view, then you can be interfering with their enjoyment of their land and their rights when it comes to that. Also, blocking someone from being able to use a part of their property by the construction of a fence or some type of barricade, those type of things. Any way that a person interferes with the enjoyment of land that is a legally protected right, then that is where we get nuisance from. Personal property is a little different. We do have some of the same pieces. There's trespass. With that, it's the intentional taking or use of another's personal property. This is the entering onto it, basically using their property without their consent. Trespass of personal property is using their property without their consent. So there's, a real similarity between trespass for personal and real property. Conversion in personal property is the intentional exercise of control over another's personal property. And keep in mind, this is still talking about something that you have a legal right to. This is your legal right. You have the ability to use this in a way that is legal and does not interfere with anyone else's rights and cause them harm. Uh, and you're protected from someone else either using it without your permission or taking it and exercising control over it without your uh, express permission to do so. Now, harm to economic interest, and this is where we get in more to our businesses. It can also be a person's existing contractual relations, but it really deals a lot with business. The economic or pecuniary interests include a person's existing or prospective contractual relations, their business reputation, their name and likeness, and their the protection for freedom of deception. So interference with contractual relations as intentionally causing one of the parties of the contract to not perform. Now, later on when we study contracts, you'll see this in a little bit more detail and it'll be explained a little bit more. But a party who interferes with a party's ability to perform a contract and possibly causes them to breach or whatever the case may be, they can be sued in court. And it's handled a little different than a normal tort would be, but the results can be similar. Disparagement of publication of false statements about another's property or products. Now, think back to what we talked about with what libel was and what slander was. Disparagement works the same way with the statements about another's property or their products, and the defenses are similar to that also. Fraudulent misrepresentation is a false statement made with the knowledge of its falsity, intended to induce another to act. When we talk about, once again, we talk about contracts and a couple other things we'll talk about. What we'll see is with fraudulent misrepresentation, there is also a couple of legal doctrines that go with this. And in contracts, especially when you represent yourself in a way that you would be considered a party to a contract, the other party can hold you liable or to that contract because of your representation. Fraudulent misrepresentation is when you make a false statement knowing that you do so to get the other to act, trying to get someone to make a purchase, trying to get someone to invest in your corporation or your company or your small business, whatever it may be. Doing those things and making a false statement. We have made this much money and we only need so much more to get there, when that is not true, when you do not have the finances to back it up. Or we have this product and we're at this stage of development in the product when all you have currently is just a idea or a name of a product and you haven't done anything with it. Those are false statements that are trying to get someone to invest money, to get them to act in a way that helps you out, but may harm them if when the falsity comes out. Here's another one of those nice little charts that'll help you understand those intentional torts a little bit better. Defenses to those intentional torts. Even if someone has intentionally invaded the interests of the plaintiff, they will not be liable if the conduct was privileged. It's privileged if it furthers an interest of such social importance that the law confers immunity from tort liability for the damage the conduct causes. Lying to get someone to act in a certain way, fraudulent misrepresentation. Law enforcement is protected from that to the extent that telling a lie during an interrogation to get someone to confess if they know they're guilty That can be one of those privilege issues. I've talked about the privilege when it comes to elections. There are others where there may be a time when uh, we need to hear a version of the truth that may not be the whole truth, so that there's not any damage to economic interest or to uh, national security, those type of things. It's privileged if it interest of such social importance is furthered uh, by that act. All right, but it has to be specifically furthers an interest of social importance. So you think about what social importance is. The We'll start off with what I kind of ended with before I started explaining a little further, that national defense, national security, those type of things. Maybe it is economic uh, security, whatever it may be. When we think about what social importance would be, other items of social importance is to keep a scare from happening to the extent that it causes panic and uh, individuals becoming harmed due to the panic, like just asking people to leave a theater without going into the theater and yelling fire. You say that, okay, let's get everyone to leave, whatever the issue may be. We just have everyone leave. That could be something as simple as turning the film off and making the comment or the statement that the film is messed up. We need everyone to go ahead and leave when the film is not messed up. There's not a falsehood there that cannot be traced back to we were protecting the safety of individuals by having them leave the area. A defense to an intentional towards consent. A person may not recover for injury to which they willingly or knowingly consent. The reason that a lot of uh, rides and certain things that are explicitly dangerous will have you sign a you know consent form is due to the fact that they want to make sure they're protected in case you are injured. Where you said, okay, I understand all the dangers that can happen here, and you sign off stating that you take full responsibility of that. Once again, privilege or self-defense. If you're defending yourself, there are certain laws in place in certain states that will build upon the self-defense. As long as you are preventing harm to yourself or someone else when there is an imminent danger. All right, so that's the defenses to intentional torts. And I'm going to end this one here. Told you I was going to make these shorter. And then when the next video will be negligence and strict liability. So I will see you in the next video very soon.